They brutally killed an old couple over a small matter. Fedra brutality, while killing them, was unimaginable. Mafia thought themselves to be invincible, unaware a psychopath is coming to gift them most gruesome death. Welcome back to Paramount Recapped. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me. Four gang members sit in a car, getting high, waiting for their next target. One of them confidently says, "Relax, our next victim is rolling in money. It's easy pickings." The others nod, but one can't help but quip, "Let's just hope they're not as broke as the last guy. I'm still recovering from that $20 he had in change." They all laugh, putting on their rabbit masks. They spot a girl leaving a building and heading to the bank. The thugs, now alert, start tailing her car. After a while, they intercept her at the end of the road and drag her out of her vehicle. One thug searches the car, but after a moment, he turns around and says, "You'd think with all the money she was carrying, she'd have a GPS for cash. There's nothing here." Just as they're about to leave, an elderly couple, George and Sandra, drive by and stop. The thugs, clearly not expecting an audience, are caught off guard. One of the thugs demands, "Old man, get out of here before I turn you into next week's news." George isn't having it and replies, "I was next week's news 30 years ago. You're just late." He takes a swing at one of the thugs, knocking him out cold. As the other thugs prepare to attack, they hear police sirens in the distance. "Who called the fun police?" one thug shouts before they all scatter. The police arrive, and George, still dusting off his hands, tells the officers he was just trying to stop the thug, not kill him. The chief inspector, shaking his head, says, "Yeah, George, tell that to his cracked skull. Should have thought about that before you started throwing haymakers." George is then arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. Later, the three remaining thugs meet their boss, Warren, to explain how the robbery went sideways. Warren asks about his brother, and when they tell him he's dead, he freaks out. "What? You lost my brother? You can't even keep track of family members now." Furious, he orders them not to come back until George is handled. George is released on bail and returns home, thinking the worst is over. Little does he know, the thugs, including Warren, are following him. When they knock on his door, George mutters, "It's like I'm the main character in a really bad soap opera." Warren's crew grabs George and pins him against the wall, shoving a knife in his mouth. One thug smirks, "Should have stuck to crossword puzzles, old man. Being a hero is above your pay grade." They tie George and his wife up in the garage, pouring gasoline everywhere. As George sobs, Warren, holding a lighter, says, "You guys should have invested in fire insurance before lighting the match." The scene shifts to a plane landing. Enter Jimmy Vickers, a special operations interrogation officer, returning home after hearing about his parents' brutal deaths. On his way home, he listens to a voicemail from his mom, saying how excited she was to see him. Jimmy sighs and says to himself, "Well, Mom, I bet this wasn't the reunion you had in mind." Back home, he hears another message from his friend, Griffin, offering condolences. Jimmy heads to a bar to drown his sorrows, where he bumps into Debs and Terry, who were close to his parents. Jimmy questions Terry about the night of the attack. Terry, avoiding eye contact, says he knows nothing. Jimmy replies, "Terry, you live 50 yards away. If you heard my dad snoring every night, you definitely heard the screaming. Spill it." Terry, growing annoyed, warns Jimmy to leave. But Jimmy grabs him by the collar, saying, "You'll tell me, or this conversation gets really physical." Debs steps in, saying, "Guys, let's keep this civil. This is a bar, not WrestleMania." Finally, Terry confesses that he saw four gang members break into Jimmy's house. "I heard your dad, but I was too scared to do anything," Terry admits. Jimmy sighs. "You didn't think to at least yell out the window? Maybe even a 'Hey, you kids, get off my lawn'?" Jimmy stands in his parents' burned-down garage, where his friend Griffin shares a lead. A black BMW was seen speeding away that night. Jimmy sarcastically comments that only thugs with bad taste drive BMWs. Despite Griffin's warning not to act impulsively, Jimmy asks for the CCTV footage. The next morning, Jimmy visits his parents' graves, where his estranged wife, Morgan, offers her condolences, mentioning that he missed the funeral. Jimmy responds, "At least I didn't miss the Vengeance tour." Later, Griffin informs Jimmy that the BMW is linked to Warren, the brother of a man George accidentally killed. Jimmy tracks down Warren, rams his car, and ties him up, dousing him with gasoline. Warren taunts Jimmy about the murder, but Jimmy lights a cigarette and says, "Well, I'm doing what I have to do too," before extracting the names of other gang members and leaving Warren to die. Later, Jimmy, injured, limps to Morgan's house, where she tends to his wounds, joking that he should invest in Band-Aids instead of gasoline. The next day, news of Warren's death spreads, but no one mourns him due to his reputation as a thug. Meanwhile, Rob and Leon suspect Warren's business partner, Caleb, of being behind the murder, but Caleb denies it, sarcastically saying he would have done a cleaner job. That night, Griffin warns Jimmy against taking the law into his own hands. Jimmy smirks and replies, "You sure? Because it's starting to feel like a movie, and I'm the guy writing the script." Griffin starts to realize the corruption in the police department when DCI Holland dismisses an armed robbery and blames the victim for fighting back. Griffin argues that the shopkeeper was just protecting his business, but Holland brushes it off, making a joke about insurance payouts. Meanwhile, Jimmy is on a revenge mission, targeting gang member Ryan. After kidnapping Ryan, Jimmy uses his special forces skills to force him to swallow cement, leading to his death. The police later find Ryan's body encased in concrete, and Holland sees the bizarre case as an opportunity for a promotion. Later, bar owner Terry shows Holland CCTV footage of Jimmy dragging a man into his car. Holland advises Terry to keep it quiet, but Terry hands over the footage out of fear. The cops then question Jimmy's wife, Morgan, who lies to protect him, while Jimmy hides at her place. As two officers try to arrest Jimmy at a market, two men beat them up and help Jimmy escape. Jimmy is shocked when Colonel Leach, an old associate, steps out of the car. Leach gives Jimmy 48 hours to finish his revenge before returning to duty, seeing him as a valuable asset. Griffin, on the other hand, confides in his SWAT team buddy Joe, warning him not to take the case lightly. When Joe asks if Griffin knows the killer, Griffin reluctantly reveals that it's his friend, Jimmy, and explains that Jimmy's parents were brutally murdered. Joe believes Jimmy has gone rogue, but Griffin insists that Holland is exploiting the case for personal gain, which could destroy the department. With the army secretly backing him, Jimmy continues his revenge, targeting another gang member, Leon. After sending Leon disturbing photos of Ryan's dead body, Jimmy ambushes him and ties him to a gate and a car. When Leon angers Jimmy, he shows no mercy and rips Leon in half using the car. The next day, Colonel Leach meets DCI Holland at a restaurant and demands that he hand over everything the police have on Jimmy, saying Jimmy is military property. Holland refuses, smugly saying, "If I were in charge of the law, you'd be in a cell too." The colonel tells Holland a story from 2009 about Jimmy interrogating a terrorist who planned to attack the UK. After just 10 minutes with Jimmy, the terrorist spilled everything. Jimmy doesn't fear death, Leach says. He welcomes it. The colonel warns Holland to back off, but Holland, now seeing Jimmy as a challenge, vows to catch him. Later, the superintendent and police chief meet with the head of the army, who bluntly tells them that Jimmy is too important for Britain's top-secret operations to be detained. The military high command orders the police to report directly to them about the case. That night, Jimmy tracks down the last gang member, Rob, who was involved in his parents' murder. Rob is dragged outside by some drug dealers, and Jimmy forces him to knock on the door of their hideout. Though Rob tries to escape, Jimmy kills all the drug dealers except for Warren's business partner, Caleb. Jimmy ties Caleb to a chair and begins mixing chemicals in a barrel, the same kind used to make drugs. Then, he dissolves all the cash in the barrel before pouring the corrosive liquid over Caleb, melting him alive. Meanwhile, Holland realizes Griffin has been feeding Jimmy information. He pressures Griffin about Jimmy's next target, but Griffin refuses to betray his friend. Holland defies his superiors and tracks down Rob, the last surviving gang member, who had escaped from the hospital. In the next scene, we see Rob rifling through some letters in Jimmy's apartment. Jimmy catches up with him and forces him to drive to the harbor. There, Jimmy makes him kneel, hands bound, and pulls out a syringe, claiming it's filled with a deadly spray that burns people from the inside out. Rob, smugly defiant, tells Jimmy to check the trunk of his car. To Jimmy's horror, he finds Morgan, his wife, dead. When the SWAT team, escorted by Holland, arrives at the scene, Jimmy, in a rage, empties his gun's clip into Rob. Griffin shows up and confronts Holland, accusing him of releasing Rob from the hospital, which led to Morgan's death. Holland tries to defend himself, saying he let Rob go to lead them to Jimmy, not knowing he would kill Morgan. Realizing the situation, SWAT leader Joe orders his team to stand down, much to Holland's shock. They allow the injured Jimmy to leave the scene. Holland tries to stop him, but Jimmy punches him in the face, leaving him stunned. The movie closes with a random girl taking out the trash in a dark alley. Suddenly, two thugs corner her. As she screams for help, Jimmy appears at the other end of the alley. The thugs confront him, demanding he leave. The screen goes black as Jimmy flashes a sinister smile.